Thank you all for attending, firstly, on this cold, brisky morning, and for being so enthusiastic to be here so early as well. There's a lot of people even waiting outside at 7:45, which was good to see. Today is going to be a fairly relaxed affair. We've got some very good speakers on. I'll count myself on that, hopefully. But we've got a lot of good thought leadership there as well in relation to the cloud, where it's going, how things are going to develop, and what the state of play is. As I say, it'll be a fairly relaxed affair, so as we go through it, so there'll be a lot of chopping and changing between presentations. But instead of interrupting or stopping the flow of where we are, because we do want to stay on time as much as possible, what we'd ask you to do is keep the questions to the Q&A session, which is just towards the end of the session. But if you are losing the train of the presenter, the train of thought, on where we're going with something, by all means put your hand up and ask the speaker to explain something in more detail. Especially myself, as you've probably gathered already, I tend to speak pretty quickly, so if I go off on a tangent, by all means put your hand up. And there's a couple of house rules or some details to know about the environment we're in. The toilets and so on, you probably already gathered, are outside to the left down there, as are the fire exits as well. We have the bistro across there, and we'll be taking a break halfway through the morning. And during that break, there'll be again pastries, coffees, teas, all that good stuff as well, so we can get the sugar rush we need for the second half, if you like. So just something else, just want to show you briefly. Put the volume. Sorry, someone's turned down the volume. Good old technology. So you get the message, yeah? So if we could just keep interruptions to as little as possible. What I'll do now is, as I'm sliding over the changing slide decks, I'll hand you over to Andy O'Kelly. Andy is probably known to most of you. He's been in the industry a long time and involved with some of the major infrastructure and network type projects as well. So certainly someone to listen to, a credible expert on the cloud and where it's going and everything else like that. And Andy is the Chief Architect of eircom Business. And I'll hand you over to Andy now, and as I just swap out the decks. Yeah, sure. That's great.
Hello. Morning, everybody. All right. Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Paul. I'm Andrew O'Kelly, Chief Architect in eircom Business. And Paul asked me this morning to give you an overview of cloud technology. I think the title, a bit unpleasant word, Decomposing the Cloud. Sorry for that so early in the morning. But what I'm hoping to do is give you an overview of where the technology is at, and maybe more importantly, why this matters, why it's important, certainly for our customers, and why it's important for us as an organization, eircom, delivering solutions to enterprises in particular, and government, which is my area of responsibility. So the first thing, no technology event would be complete without a Dilbert cartoon. Two things: you typically get a Dilbert cartoon, and you get lots of slides from Gartner. When you see Dilbert slides, Gartner slides, you know something is happening in the industry. This one here, I think, summarizes Paul's role, perhaps. I think he's this guy here, Mordoc, the preventer of information service. And I think depending upon your role within your organization, you're probably either Mordoc or you're Dilbert here. In other words, can I deliver services using cloud? That's Dilbert's position here. He seems to be very pro-technology, very forward-reaching kind of character. Or you're Mordoc saying, I don't trust these guys at all. What the hell's going on in the cloud? How can I control that? My job is on the line if there's any kind of issue around the integrity of my data. So we know something is going on. This is about 2 years old, this Dilbert slide. So again, we know it's been going on for some time. And I guess the key point I'll be trying to make today is, whether you like it or not, cloud computing is happening. Now, the fact that you've got hoaxes being pulled lambasting individuals in Galway County Council. I don't know if you saw that earlier in the week, where there was an implication that some character in Galway County Council who was named, and by the way, this is a hoax, saying that Galway was the ideal place for cloud computing because of the amount of rain that they have per annum. So the fact that you've got lampooning of individuals going on now to do with this term means it's absolutely front of mind within the industry. Some boring definitions, and I know from looking at the badges out there, a lot of people don't need to read this slide. They are absolutely going to be familiar with what the technology is and the different types of technology that exists within cloud. But let's just step through it very, very quickly in case anybody out there is unaware of it. So cloud is a computing capability. It's an abstraction between the computing resource and the underlying technology architecture. Okay, you can read it on yourself, but it's a way in which you can run your IT without having to invest in any resources yourselves. That's the concept, that's the theory at least. Private cloud says, well, I want all that, but I don't want to be sharing it with anybody else. I want it to be my own, because I'm a server hugger. I only feel confident and trusting when I have this myself. If you're a very, very large organization, a global organization, that might be a valid option for you to take. But for most organizations, the ability to have maybe a virtual private cloud is of interest. I get all that benefit of the dynamic provisioning, the elasticity of it, the compute power of it, the fact that I can switch it on and switch it off to meet my demand. I want all of that, but I also want this to be private. I don't want it to be open and accessible to the rest of the world. And that, I guess, is the utopian kind of idea that you have of security being persistent, your compliance, I guess, being met, but with all these benefits of elastic computability. So the characteristics, and I'm just showing our own one here, a private cloud, but obviously we'll go in a minute through all the various people that have these things. You've got storage, memory, and processors available for you in pools, typically. They are accessed through the network, which is one of the reasons why, for eircom, this is such an interesting area. Multi-tenanted, typically. You've got lots of people residing on the same footprint. It can be provisioned extremely rapidly, and it's charged based on usage. Okay? So again, apologies for teaching you all to suck eggs if you know all this stuff already. But again, perhaps some people in the room aren't aware of the definitions. So what? What does that all mean? This is an exaggeration for effect. Okay? And I've been in this business a while. I'm sure some of you have been in this business for a while. So let's be a user for a minute and be very critical of existing IT models and IT organizational structures. On the left, you've got a typical comms room. This is where your IT is based at the moment. Right? I've been in those rooms for many years, and they tend to be in the belly of organizations, and perhaps key IT functions are based on architectures that look a bit like that. So the confidence of the business to deliver any kind of change is sometimes, there's less than solid credibility in what IT as an internal resource can deliver and do. In the middle is the face of the IT organization, IT/security, and he's Dr. No. So you go in as a business and you say, I want to do the following thing. I need to deploy another 100 people on the road. I need to set up a sales operation in a different jurisdiction. And I believe I can do this really rapidly, can't I? No, you can't. You need to do this, 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 this. A list as long as your arm. All the risks, why it's going to take 18 months to do, why it's going to cost you another $1 million capex. All of these things start arising. And the business gets somewhat frustrated by that. And on the right-hand side, you've got the cash problem. If you've got to invest in this, if you've got to put capital into it, in other years perhaps that was possible. Certainly for many organizations, and I would list eircom among them, access to capital can be challenging. What is the cloud promise? The cloud promise is something like this. You go from this kind of scary mesh of wires and out-of-date boxes into these beautiful streamlined data centers, such as our data center here in Clonshaugh. Beautiful, resilient power, fantastic state-of-the-art architecture. Great, I like the look of that. You go from Dr. No to the Nike JFDI model of just do it. I'm the business, I want this, I want it now. And I want to pay for it as I go. So the fact that you can click in with your credit card details and have access to these things is extremely powerful for the business. However, Ernst & Young, in their most recent report, the Global Information Security Survey, which I would recommend. It's an interesting read. It's called Into the Cloud, Out of the Fog, but don't let that put you off. It is a good read. They make the point here that whether the IT organization likes it or not, cloud is occurring. And this is interesting. This indicates a sort of a big concern of, I think we used to call it shadow IT, the fact that if you cannot meet the demand of your internal customer, they'll go somewhere else, and they'll deliver it somewhere else themselves. That seems to be going on. This is an interesting question. Which of the following controls have you implemented to mitigate the new or increased risks related to the use of cloud computing? 52%, none. So there's an acknowledgement that the risk is increasing, but nothing is being done about it. And secondly, and I was having a conversation beforehand with a person I've known for a number of years, and he was indicating their approach to this is the second one, stronger oversight of the contract management process, which I don't believe necessarily improves your risk position at all. But either nothing or that is the extent to which people are dealing with this, and dealing with a wave that's outside of their control. Does everyone love cloud as a result of that? I'm not sure. First thing I'd encourage you to do is if you look at something like public cloud and look at the elegance, the beauty, the simplicity of something like Amazon Web Services, it's very transparent. Just take down the user agreement and have a read of it and see the various clauses that would concern you if you were trying to deliver this as an internal SLA to your customers. They don't pretend to be anything that they're not. It's very American, very upfront. What you see is what you get, it's what you buy. But some interesting issues within it. Very interesting one for the technologists within the room is around design principles. We've invested for many years on the presumption that the infrastructures that we're delivering, applications on top of, are fundamentally reliable. We spend a lot of time going from 99.99% availability to 99.995, etc., with each tiny increment of 0.001 probably costing us hundreds, if not millions, of euro. This is an interesting comment here from Adrian Cockcroft, who is the cloud architect in Netflix. And he's saying, don't rely on these things at all in terms of their fundamentals. Rely upon them to fail and build your architectures appropriately. They use a test feature called Chaos Monkey. What Chaos Monkey does is it goes and it kills processes randomly. And they make the point that if I go and I kill processes randomly all the time, I will ultimately architect this thing correctly. As a result, when something like Amazon falls over for a number of hours, Netflix stays operational. If an organization had taken their current design and just migrated onto Amazon with no changes of those principles or those testing structures, they would have experienced an outage. Very interesting point, because obviously availability is a key issue when we're talking about security. There's three primary models for cloud computing then, okay? Just look at them here for a second. Infrastructure as a service is the first one. Rather than buying your own machines, getting that compute power, and I know someone in government who refers to this almost derisively as grunt power, you buy us as a service rather than buying machines that are almost immediately out of date. Why do that anymore? Just get your compute power elsewhere in the cloud. So computing resources provided on demand. And Amazon Web Services is the global leader by a clear mile around the infrastructure as a service model. Hugely successful around it. And the question that you might want to ask is, they're so successful, who else can compete on this? And is there going to be an element of lock-in over time? But again, very clear and transparent in what they do. I'm not meaning to put eircom in the same box at all in terms of scale, but we can offer infrastructure as a service, and we do successfully offer this to customers. In a minute I'll explain why we make sense in certain circumstances. Platform as a service, an environment for scalable bespoke applications. Don't write your applications in terms of services that are going to be built in your own data center. Write them specifically for the cloud. And within that, you've got Microsoft Azure and you've got Force.com as the big emerging forces in that space. And then finally, the one that's been around the longest is software as a service. We would have known this originally as the application service provider model that was unfortunately killed off in the dot-com bubble being burst. But it was a solid model. And what you have is the delivery of an end-user application without having to build it yourself. Very attractive. And some of these underlying technologies are what is facilitating a more strong play now into the marketplace with those applications. And the ones you're probably using yourselves and familiar with will certainly be Google with things like Gmail or Google Docs and Salesforce. And these things are interdependent. So a great example of an Irish startup doing very well at the moment, we use them ourselves for video-based pre-interview. If you haven't seen it, check it out, sonru.com. They are, I guess, an application service provider, a SaaS model, but they sit on top of Amazon Web Services. They themselves use it. And what you'll find now with many applications, if you click into them, with some very well-known brands, look at the bottom line with your URLs, and you'll see AWS start flickering up every now and then. And that indicates that some of those brands are using the elastic compute capability of Amazon Web Services embedded in what they're offering to you. So this stuff is happening anyway. But there's an interdependency then between the top line and how the bottom is being implemented. In eircom ourselves, eircom Music Hub, which I'm sure you're all using, is running on top of a service from a company called MSP. So we ourselves are using a SaaS model to deliver a branded offering into the marketplace. And finally, this is an interesting one, Farmville. Farmville is provided by a company called Zynga. Is anybody familiar with Farmville and Zynga? Would have met Zynga a couple of years ago in San Francisco. And they were saying that the application that they were launching, it had only been out for a couple of months at that point in time, they hadn't known the uptake. They hadn't known how many people were going to use this, how many people were going to play on a regular basis. And they had decided that the most risk-averse method of architecting this was to use AWS. So they built it on top of Amazon Web Services themselves. And that allowed them to deal with a completely unpredicted uptake of the game. If they'd built it on their own platform, they would have been scotched because the user experience would have been so poor so quickly because of its success. It would have killed off the Farmville proposition, the Farmville game. However, that doesn't mean they're going to stay on Amazon Web Services. In fact, just prior to their IPO, they announced that while they've got 1,000 new servers in a 24-hour period that they can bring online, and this is the beauty of the elasticity of Amazon, and they've got a petabyte of data being forced out or handed out to users each day, they're going to invest 150 million in private cloud. They're taking some of these services back internally. That's because they want the reliability and the control of their own destiny to one extent. I think it's also because they want to control some of the risk around the credit card payment transactions, perhaps. I know Matthew will be talking about PCI compliance in the cloud a little later on. So you've got that trend of people initially building in the cloud, perhaps, public cloud, and then bringing it back internally just to, once they've sized it, once they've dimensioned it, using those cloud resources. Is it just startups? Is it just international brands that are doing this? Government, there have been quite a bit of commentary in the last year or so from people maybe lambasting government for their lack of commitment to cloud in terms of its own adoption of IT, while at the same time being quite happy to have a very successful cloud computing industry emerging through the best efforts of IDA, etc., within Ireland. A bit of a disjoint between the two. Slightly unfair, I think. The government have some internationally very well recognized e-citizen or e-government initiatives, such as the Revenue Online service and the Motor Tax Online service, which in part are delivered through other organizations providing elements of infrastructure. And eircom would be central to both those particular services. But in the public service reform notification on the 17th of November, a couple of weeks ago, there was a clear statement of intent over what government is going to do here. So again, I'm sure that's of interest to a lot of the industry players in the room today. It's also interesting the timeline. The Q1 of next year, a couple of months of time, we will know exactly what the strategy is for use of cloud computing within public service. And they have some specific concerns over territoriality. Where is my data? Is my data remaining within the state? Is it under control within the state? And again, I'm sure Paul and Matthew can be speaking to that a little later on. It's not just people we know of and we deal with on a day-to-day basis with recognized brands who are looking to cloud to deliver things. I'll put this under the other category. If you go to Amazon at the moment, they have a lovely offer. If you've never used Amazon Web Services before, they'll give you some free services for a year. So you can go in and say, I'd like a machine, please. They say, grand, here's a machine. Here's an amount of storage space. You can read all the characteristics of it here. 10 gigabyte of storage, 5 gigabytes of standard storage. You know, it's good. It's a great machine. And it's free. And an organization called the Tor Cloud, who are looking at ways of anonymizing data globally and allowing torrent sites to exist, for instance, as well as some perhaps laudable ambitions of allowing democratic communication to occur, but some interesting stuff going on across Tor as well. And again, maybe Paul will speak to that a little later on. They've looked at this and said, great, I'm going to create a standard image. You go get yourself a brand new Amazon Web Service for nothing for a year, run up this image, and participate in creating this big anonymized torrent cloud across the internet. So it's not always going to be business-related function that can gain access to that technology. Whatever you might think about Tor, you know, an organization with maybe more malicious intent can do something similar here. So again, be aware that for all of the beneficial upside of cloud, we've got some other interesting dynamics that will possibly occur and arise. So what workloads are suitable for the cloud? If you're looking at what should go where, and I know that Mark will be looking at this in a bit more detail later on. I heard this phrase recently, and it was worryingly easy to remember, and it kind of trips off the tongue as to what people should be doing in the cloud. They should be agile at the edge and compliant at the core. If only it was as easy to do as it is to say, we'd be all right. But that's a phrase, I think, that we will be hearing more of, that kind of concept we'll be hearing more of. My core information absolutely has to be compliant. And that's, again, where Matthew will be looking at, say, PCI, Payments Card Industry Compliance. And I know Paul will have a lot to say about that too. But the agility at the edge, allowing this kind of SaaS model or IaaS model to emerge, makes sense if it's at the edge of what you do. The top public workloads, the things that are moving there already, audio, video, web conferencing, WebEx. Does anybody use WebEx here? Again, absolutely a cloud-based provisioning model. Service help desks. You can get some very cool applications that you can obtain on a SaaS model. Infrastructure for training and demonstration, stuff that perhaps doesn't have to have the same level of compliance as the end-state architecture. WAN capacity VoIP infrastructure, an area where absolutely eircom would be central to this in an Irish context. We have an ability to deliver unified communications on a pay-as-you-go model as opposed to investing in infrastructure for your own sites. Desktop utilities, application test. Unclassified storage, just a bunch of disk that you want to just throw something onto. A great place to put it is in the cloud. And high-performance computing. Some interesting stats recently about Amazon and somebody deciding to run up as many machines as they possibly could on Amazon and clustering them together. And they're hitting a compute point which is maybe approaching that of your traditional high-performance computing blue gene type boxes. Again, a very interesting disruptive approach, putting massive compute power in the hands of any kind of a researcher. The stuff that you want to keep private, clearly anything that's security related, data that's classified, data that you really betting the business on owning and controlling this stuff yourselves, long-term data archiving, transactional systems, say a clinical trial data collection system. Are you really going to put that in the cloud? And then production-specific control applications in ERP. And a lot of that is the heart and lungs of what IT departments are doing today. And a lot of that's going to remain private. I can't see a lot of that stuff migrating. But great agility being offered on the left-hand side there. So the deployment models, you can try and do these things on premises and internal. You can try and create data center environments within your own private footprint. You can do an amount of it internally, and try and integrate it in some way with the external public cloud, getting some of that benefit of the elasticity and getting some of the value that they have because of the scale of what they're constructing. Constructing things which are not based upon the brands that you might buy in terms of building it within your own premises. The way these public clouds are being constructed, it's very disruptive in its selection of technologies. In some cases, these guys are now writing their own technologies and manufacturing their own technologies to overcome some inhibiting factors that they see within some of the brands which are highly appropriate for enterprise class systems in and of themselves. So different types are emerging. And to wrap up, the benefits of public versus the private cloud model. For the public cloud, you've got that consumption-based pricing, minimal upfront investment, and the ease of access to it. The drawbacks, your data is, whether you like it or not, available somewhere else. Where is it? So even from a legal concern, if you've got specific territoriality issues with your data, that it has to be in Europe or it has to be in Ireland, even if your service contract says it will be, how do you know if that's true? How do you know if a disaster event has lent it to be moved and deployed somewhere else? It's a difficult one. So the drawbacks as well, the least common denominator functionality, right? The basics is what you get. But that said, I think there's like 12 different versions of IT that you can draw down upon from Amazon already. It can be expensive for enterprise. Again, that's one of the myths, perhaps, that this is going to be the cheapest way to do this on a persistent basis. It may be the cheapest way to do it in terms of an initial deployment, working out the size and the scale of something. But over time, we do see large organizations bringing these things back in-house, albeit with a cost, in the case of Zynga, of 100 to 150 million in 1 year. But it can be done. And then, maybe question what's driving an organization of that size to make that decision. Maybe the lack of transparency on the location, architecture, and the ops, and the potential for lock-in, the potential for having this stuff already on someone else's platform on your behalf, but an inability perhaps to get it back when you need to get it back. So private cloud, all of those paradigms of public cloud implemented for you, right? By an organization such as ourselves, obviously lots of people playing in this space now. You can get those compute benefits, the pay-as-you-go benefits, but you know where it's constructed. It can be integrated into your network, into your existing environment, perhaps much more closely. An SLA to suit the organization. You will not have anyone in Amazon talk to you about a variant of the SLA that they publish. They don't do that. They don't renegotiate their SLA. It's one SLA for everyone, independent of who you are. If you deal with an organization who's got a virtual private cloud and can construct one for you, obviously the SLA can be tailored to your specific requirements. And if you've got an organization which is playing purely into your market sector, better chance of getting a good outcome there, because it'll be customizable and flexible. And you get that clearer support structure. With a public cloud, the public cloud player really does not care what's happening on those machines if it's infrastructure as a service. Doesn't matter whether they're working well. Doesn't matter whether the data is lost, whether they're crashing. That's your own business. They've just given you essentially a CPU, some memory, and some disk. How it's performing is your own business. And again, compare that to the challenges that we've been very familiar with in traditional IT over the years. It would be naive to assume that we don't need to do that monitoring, that management, that optimization anymore. You do need to do it. And perhaps private cloud is the better place to do that right now. The drawbacks, obviously the initial investment in getting it built, if you're going to try and build it yourself. If you're going to try and get it from a provider, that provider's got to build it too. And let's be clear about the economics here. No one's building these things for nothing. And finally, the ongoing operational effort of perhaps having that merger of your own infrastructure and a private cloud infrastructure. So they're the two issues. And again, I hope I've set the theme and the background as to what's going on, and that it's clarified where I think the marketplace is at right now. And from here, I'm going to hand over to Paul, who hopefully is going to address all of these security concerns that relate around this, and hopefully he's got a silver bullet. Have you got a silver bullet, Paul?
Silver bullet slide, don't worry.
All right, good man. Okay, thank you.